Going through some old videos, I came across this interview I did with Roger Upton 26 years ago. It's January the 10th, and I'm talking with Roger Upton. Roger, how long have you been hawking red grouse?
Well, I think I first tried when I was, it's about 1950s. Stephen, Frank and I went to a friend's moor in Derbyshire, central England, and I don't think we caught a grouse, but we had a lot of fun trying to. And then a few years later we had a sort of serious opportunity. I had a few days hawking with a chap called Grant Fisk in Dumfriesshire in southern Scotland. And we had some quite successful grouse hawking there. I remember catching my first grouse, my first black grouse, the big dark black grouse that takes a bit of catching. And then, thanks really to James Robertson Justice, the old film actor, and Stephen, I was invited to Birkin in Sutherland, and we hawked there from about 1966 for some years. I had some wonderful years, a lot of grouse, and I learnt a lot. Yeah.
What type of dogs are primarily used for hawking red grouse?
Well, traditionally English setters. Gilbert Blaine, the great grouse falconer, he was an English setter man, so was St Quintin. And they say in their books that it's on record that, I haven't yet found where it's on record, it's on record that English setters are slightly better than English pointers for hawking. The evidence all seems to go slightly the other way, in that both Charles Hawkins Fisher, one of the great old falconers, he used pointers, Blaine did in his early years, and certainly we've, over the last 20 years, every falconer has used pointers almost without exception. The odd Irish setter, the odd German pointer, but really English pointers.
Now, what is the season for red grouse?
Well, we have a season which is exactly the same as the shooting season, and it's been established for a long time. And so we have the start of the season, August the 12th. It's known as the Glorious 12th. And it's a magic moment. In the old days, you would see the trains going north from Euston and the stations in London loaded with pointers and setters and gun cases and hampers of clothes and things, all the wealthy going to their moors in the north. And it has that magic feel for us as well when we drive north on the 10th or 11th to be ready to catch our first grouse on the 12th. It has a magic sort of feel about it, and long may it last. The season ends on December the 10th, and virtually the only falconer who hawks right through to the end of the season is Stephen Frank, gentleman of leisure, we always jokingly tell him, and he has the time to do it. And some of the very best of the hawking is late in the season when there's a crisp, cold weather, a bit of snow on the ground. Not too deep, and dogs are going wild, hawks are really fit and strong. Wonderful sport. Yeah.
I would imagine the birds used for hawking red grouse would be primarily longwings.
Yeah, I mean, actually people have caught them with goshawks. Early in the season, when you get a point, the grouse jump right at your feet. You can get a slip with a goshawk of maybe 10, 15 yards, and of course a goss will have it quickly. But they're very fast into their flight. They're very active game birds, and certainly as the season progresses, they start getting up further and further out from you. And certainly with shooting, the dogs can still get a point on them, but as the guns start walking forward, the grouse go before the guns can get within range. So shooting over dogs has a limited season by how things work out, not by any laws of the land. Of course, driven grouse are another method of shooting them. It's a different matter. It doesn't matter if they're wild, particularly. And it's said to be the most exhilarating form of shooting there is. These brown bullets, they say, they are flying straight at you. And of course, there's enormous bags of grouse on some of these moors. I mean, you get moors that take 10,000 brace in a season. And that's a lot of grouse. But no, it's great sport.
What type of falcons are primarily used for hunting red grouse?
Well, basically the peregrine. The peregrine is par excellence. I mean, you know, it's it's a match for the grouse. I have a preference for tearsaws, mainly because all my friends and peers at Falconry do so well with falcons I can't better them, so I better try something different. So I tried tearsaws. But I don't need to entirely fly tearsaws, but usually over the years I've had more tearsaws than falcons. A tearsaw is slightly smaller than the average grouse in weight. A falcon is slightly bigger, but they're a perfect match. Tearsaws on the whole mount higher more easily. Being a lazy falcon, they probably suit me better. People have caught them with sakers, with gerfalcons. Umberto Caproni, a very dear friend of mine, he had a very wonderful jerkin a few years back, and which was probably the first jerkin that regularly killed grouse in Scotland, as we know grouse falcon. Since then, one or two other falconers have brought them along, and they've proved themselves suitable for the game. But at the same time, they probably slightly overmatch the grouse. The superior speed and strength of a ger probably overmatches the grouse.
Now there are some famous areas that are no longer being used because of the changing conditions in Scotland, such as Loch Dew. Could you tell me a little bit about Loch Dew and about the future of grouse hawking and how in Scotland?
Well, I can tell you a lot about Loch Dew. It was a sort of falconer's heaven, really, in a funny way. This wonderful old sporting lodge with a castellated tower on one corner, almost like something out of a horror film, really, to some people. To me, a magic place. Surrounded by moorland, completely surrounded by moorland, with a good stock of grouse on it. Geoffrey Pollard first went there in the early 60s, on one occasion or two occasions with Stephen Frank, and then Umberto got it a little bit later on in the late 70s, early 80s. We hawked there together with Umberto. A wonderful moor, and sadly sold for forestry. There's a lot of problems in Scotland now, and a lot of argument caused by it with this commercial forestation, with what they call monoculture planting, all the same species of trees. Really, I think, to be quite honest, as a tax gamble rather than with the serious intention of growing top quality timber. But in the process it destroys a lot of wonderful moorland, and it destroys the potential of lots of sporting activity, not just grouse hawking, but grouse shooting, deer stalking, fishing. So much of this is spoilt by this blanket forestry. And we in the very far north of Scotland have suffered most of all from this. The other problem that's coming today is the pressure of the sheer number of people who want to come hawking. It's wonderful that there are a lot of young people coming on, and some very, very good falconers among them. But the sheer pressure of them wanting to come to the sort of places which are known does put pressure on those grounds, also puts the price up. You're competing with shooting people. We want to go hawking for a minimum of 6 weeks. The shooter is quite happy to go for 2 or 3 days. And so the economics of it are pretty expensive. But forget all that, it's wonderful, and one hopes it'll last a long time. I see no reason for it to not go on. There's lots of Scotland, other parts of Scotland, where it's perfectly practical to fly hawks, and as long as falconry keeps a very high standard, so that there's no excuse for conservationists to criticise it or to be down on it, falconry has a long future.
Falconers are hunting in the afternoons, and what types of numbers, what types of limits are there on catching the grouse, and are there limits, and how are the grouse managed and taken care of?
Well, first of all, Steve, you see, compared with here, it's all privately owned land. So you rent a moor, a grouse moor, or you rent part of a grouse moor, or you rent the right to go on a grouse moor. There may be shooting on the same moor, there may even be another hawking party. And so the pressure is on there in a way. And again, what you pay, how many you kill, is all by arrangement with the landowner. The landowner may say, we haven't got too many around this year, and limit you to a 30 brace bag, that's 60 grouse, or 100 brace, whatever he decides. Some moors they charge you for the season, some moors charge you by the week. Some moors charge you per brace, say £60 a brace for the number of grouse you kill, and so on. And so this is all sort of discussable with the keepers. The grouse itself is really a ptarmigan. It's not a grouse at all, it's a ptarmigan. But it was left in England by, I would guess, I'm no great scientist, I would guess it was left in England with the receding ice age. It didn't need to go white in the winter like the ptarmigan, and so it stays red. And there it's a bird of Scotland, Ireland and the islands. And it, unlike the sage grouse, it pairs. It doesn't have a lek or anything like that. It doesn't have the men competing with one another in the same way for the ladies' pleasure. But they pair, and the pair rear the brood, and they stay together as a brood for the initial part of the season. And so early in the season you'll have young grouse, depending on the season again, very young grouse sometimes. And this is a great help when you've got a young flock and you're just starting and that sort of thing. But you don't want to catch too many of what you might call the easier ones. As the season progresses, the coveys get broken up, particularly if they're shooting on the same ground, and you'll start, instead of finding coveys, you might start finding groups of 2s and 3s. In extreme weather, you get what they call packing, where you get large numbers of grouse congregate together on the ground. But this is fairly unusual, and only in extreme weather conditions. And by December, they're beginning to pair up ready for the following year, so you start getting pairs of grouse again, with the cock looking very grand with his beautiful red eyebrow, which he flashes at the girls. And they live in this beautiful country. They must be tough. They live there in the winter. I don't know, it's a lovely atmosphere in which to fly a hawk. It's a perfect quarry to test the peregrine, not to its extreme, but to give it a test of its abilities in beautiful country, not bothered by people, not bothered by the commercial world, not bothered by modern industry or anything like that. You're really out in the wilds, and it's hard to imagine maybe for people from America to realise that in the north of Scotland there is such wild places.
I think that the reason that sage grouse hawking has evolved here in America is because of the tradition and history is hawking the red grouse and the feeling of the classical long-winged flight. The use of the dogs is a big part of it. I think this is something that Americans have always wanted to be able to do, and now with the telemetry we're able to hunt the sage grouse because of the long tail chases. But you also use telemetry now also.
Yes, we use it we hope not to use it too much. I mean, I'm always very happy if I go through a complete season and have never got it out of the car. That just gives one a personal kick. And I think in some ways one wants to try and still keep that, because, people will lose the old skills of how to find a lost hawk without a radio. There were certain skills we had in the past. People had an instinct for going to the right place to look for a lost hawk. People knew what to watch for, mobs of rooks or crows and that sort of thing. And if we entirely depend on the radio, we'll start losing these skills, which would be a pity. But equally, it's a wonderful asset. It's and it's a lovely safety valve. I regard it as a safety valve. And it also, if you're hawking with friends, and your hawk is killed down in a valley, there's a little stream in the bottom, there's quite a lot of cover, it means you find her in 3 minutes instead of in 15 minutes, and other people are waiting to fly their hawks. You get on with the sport a bit quicker. So I'm all in favour of it. I'm sure from my little observation of sage grouse hawking that which is on such a grand scale. It's a bigger bird, it's bigger country, it's higher hawks, it's bigger distances, and a very dramatic flight. I feel sure that without telemetry you probably couldn't do it. Not easily, anyway. I'm not saying it's not possible. Sure, it's possible, but you have to really tighten your hawk in.
Are the peregrines that you're using in Scotland today, are they still taken from the wild, or where do they come from?
No, we're not permitted to take from the wild, ironically, because there's probably a greater density of peregrines in Scotland than any country in the world. At one time we were concerned about them when the pesticides were at their worst, and their numbers did drop alarmingly, and then a lot of Falconers put a lot of effort into captive breeding, and I think I'm right in saying that the first chap who bred pure peregrines in England was Stephen Frank, and from that line we still have hawks today which we're flying back to those early ones he captive bred. So captive breeding is virtually the only source. I have a few old retired grannies that were caught as passages in Arabia before the restrictions came into force. But basically the IS, the hacked IS probably is the star as a game hawk. And in fact, if you go through all the old records of people like Gilbert Blaine and so on, who had access to haggers, passages, ISs, whatever, all their great successes, the majority of their really high weighting on hawks were hacked ISs. So they suit us fine.
Great. So I can have this on. Would you explain a little bit about your trip here to America and seeing some of the grouse hawking here?
Well, I first came last year, 92, January 92. We had some American friends came over at the invitation of Umberto to hawk with us in Scotland, and Lynn and Bob Strait, and from California, and they enjoyed it, I think, enormously. We showed them some reasonable sport anyway, and they said, you must come and see sage grouse hawking, and of course we'd heard about it, other friends had seen it, and so when we came to the Californian meeting that year, I got Stephen Frank to come with me, and Lynn Strait had organised for us to go to Ed Pictures and meet all the top people, Hub Quaid and Steve Chindgren and all the top falconers. And we had a wonderful 4 days of hawking, saw some wonderful hawking. A prairie, for instance, which was quite extraordinary, a white Joe waiting on in the clouds, and Jomo killing grouse as if he did it every day before breakfast. And so I thought, well, I've got to come back again and see a little bit more, to learn a little bit more, because you can't start judging on 4 days, and we've had another 4 or 5 days this year, and you can't judge on that either, really. You need to come for many years to really make a comparison. And indeed, I don't think it's right to make a comparison. It's different. It's game hawking, but it's different. It's on such a scale. In a big country with a big grouse, incredibly cold, and but what advantages you have here? I mean, a season of 6 months, unbelievable to us, and a special season for falconers. That's what's extraordinary. We don't have these sort of perks in our country, but I'm not complaining. We have our red grouse, and I think they both show falcons flying at their very best in a slightly different way. Both the sage grouse and the red grouse, I'm sure sharp-tailed grouse the same, produce the best of good hawks. Good hawks, of course, even incredibly so with the big sage grouse, make it look surprisingly easy. The same is true of a good high weighting on hawk on a red grouse. More you think, well, it was like catching a cricket ball. But believe me, it's not that easy, and I'm sure the sage grouse aren't that easy either. So.
Okay, we'll wrap this up. Just if I might make a little piece about my Falcon Jomo one time.
Yes.
Could you just tell about the flight off the fist that we saw and his powers?
That was quite extraordinary. I didn't believe either a hawk of that size or an IS was capable of such a performance. It was, funny enough, similar to the Hubara hawking I do in the desert in some senses. I mean, he slipped off the fist, and as you remarked immediately, to me, he's flying. Not just flying, he's flying something. I luckily had my glasses up, and there, I would say a mile away, was a great mob of sage grouse, and I didn't believe it possible that he was chasing these, but he was, and he drove them round in a big curving flight to the right. Half the flock broke away, but he continued after the flock coming right, got up among, not among them, but higher and behind them, and by so doing presumably dummied out one of the grouse who dropped away from the rest of the flock, but still was hammering on at the rate of knots. And he pursued that and caught it. And I don't know how long the flight was in mileage. I'm hopeless at estimating either heights or distances, but it was more than a hell of a long way. And it was quite surprising that a small hawk of that size could generate the speed to fly that grouse down. All one can put it down to is confidence. I mean, this little fella thinks he can kill a grouse, and when you think you can do it, you do it. And as I've said to many friends, I think the expression "nothing succeeds like success" must have been invented by a falconer, because it's sure true of a good hawk. It was an exceptional flight, I must say.
Roger Upton, a renowned falconer who has been actively involved in falconry for over 50 years. Roger's extensive experience as a practical falconer is mirrored by his position as Britain's leading expert on falconry heritage. He served as president of the British Falconry Club until 2013. Roger was a prolific author on the sport, not to mention a talented sculptor. He had extensive experience hawking in Arabia and is affectionately known by his friends in the Arab states as bin Shaheen, son of the Falcon.